Week 1 is come and gone, and that means that it is that time of the week to look to your Dynasty waiver wires and see if there are any players available that can actually help contribute to your roster for the remainder of 2021. And that contribution could be by actually playing them in starting lineups, by gaining value and then potentially trading them away for the maximum amount of value that they're going to have, which helps you in the future. There's multiple ways that players on your Dynasty waiver wire can actually help and assist your roster throughout the entirety of the 2021 season. So for this video, I found a handful of players that I believe could be on your Dynasty waiver wire right now that you should be looking to acquire this week. So let's get right into the video. First things first, I want to establish the fact that I'm using actual rostership data from over 600 Dynasty leagues on myfantasyleague.com, run through safe leagues. So that is helping to guide me to navigate through to players that are actually not completely rostered in every single Dynasty league out there. First and foremost, I think that there is a very small list of players that performed in week 1 that should be rostered in all of your Dynasty leagues, but just make sure, because they're not rostered in every single one of the leagues that I am pulling from on MFL. So just double check. These guys are already probably rostered, but double check on Tony Jones, running back for the New Orleans Saints, Wayne Gallman, running back for the Atlanta Falcons, KJ Hamler, wide receiver for the Denver Broncos, Dalton Schultz, tight end for the Dallas Cowboys, and David Njoku, tight end for the Cleveland Browns. Like I said, these guys are probably already rostered, but just double check just to be sure that you're not in some really weird league where those guys might be hidden or buried down there. So now that all of that is out of the way, let's get into the very first player or players that I actually believe should be rostered and picked up as part of a priority waiver wire ad in Dynasty leagues this year. And the first one is actually a pairing of San Francisco 49ers running backs. And if you've been paying attention, if you have been with us since May or even before May, I have been on the Elijah Mitchell train for so freaking long. I've called him the next Aaron Jones. I have said multiple times and have held firm in my belief that he is better than Trey Sermon, that he is a better running back. All he needs is the opportunity to show out, and I believe that he could have gotten that opportunity in a 49ers backfield that is consistently rotating guys in and out. We saw it last year where up to 4 or 5 actual running backs really had fantasy value on any given week, and I was all in on the Elijah Mitchell train. So if you listened, you might already have Elijah Mitchell on your rosters right now. He's probably managed or rostered in a lot of the leagues that you are already in as well, but he is not at 100% rostership in the Dynasty leagues that I am pulling from. He's actually only in 97%. So almost 20 of the 600 leagues that I am pulling from, Elijah Mitchell is not on a Dynasty roster. So if you're in a league like that where Elijah Mitchell is not on a roster, I'm 100% in on blowing the majority, if not all, of your waiver wire fab in acquiring Elijah Mitchell, because I think that he is the real deal. I think that he is going to be the guy, and he was 100% the guy once Raheem Mostert got hurt. He had 19 carries, over 100 yards, scored a touchdown. He was the running back to have for the San Francisco 49ers. I also think JaMycal Hasty is another guy that you could be looking to acquire right now. Currently rostered in only 53% of the Dynasty leagues that I am looking at. He only had 2 actual touches the entire game. I know it seemed like he was in a lot more. He did score a touchdown, but he had 1 reception and 1 rush attempt. So that means that all of the volume basically went to Elijah Mitchell after Raheem Mostert went down. But I still think JaMycal Hasty is 100% worth an addition to your roster because, like I said, in case anything were to happen to Elijah Mitchell, this San Francisco 49ers backfield is valuable to whoever is receiving the majority amount of the touches. And if JaMycal Hasty ever finds himself in that situation, I think that is very much valuable to your roster, and I think he'd definitely be added to the back end and just see what happens. I needed to take that Elijah Mitchell victory lap because, boy, that felt so good to watch my boy. The next player I'd like to highlight is Indianapolis Colts wide receiver Zach Pascal, and I actually highlighted his teammate Mike Strachan on last week's waiver wire video, but I want to highlight Zach Pascal because he actually performed very, very, very well this week against the Seattle Seahawks. He is a very good NFL wide receiver as well. While that hasn't necessarily translated to fantasy points and fantasy value, he could offer some very good upside this year, or even a safety floor for teams that really need wide receivers, because as of right now, he is looking like the wide receiver 2 across from Michael Pittman, while T.Y. Hilton is on the injured reserve. He actually led all Colts wide receivers in targets behind actually Jonathan Taylor and Nyheim Hines. That's just because the Colts don't really have a lot of playmakers to throw to, kind of like the New Orleans Saints, where they just kind of have a bunch of guys, and whoever ends up coming out on top is going to have the most value. And this week, that was Zach Pascal. He had 4 catches for 43 yards, caught both of Carson Wentz's passing touchdowns, and was overall just heavily involved in the offense, even though, like I said, the targets weren't necessarily there for a whole lot of the wide receivers for the Indianapolis Colts. The next wide receiver I'd like to highlight is a really, really deep name. He's actually only rostered in 7% of the dynasty leagues that I was looking at, and that is Minnesota Vikings wide receiver KJ Osborn. Because I guess that he is now Mr. Necessary after the Irv Smith injury and the biggest beneficiary of Irv Smith missing the entire single season. And this week, Osborn actually was second on the team in total targets. He actually was tied with Justin Jefferson with 9 behind Adam Thielen's 10 targets. And he hauled in 7 of those for 76 yards. Had a very just solid overall day, 14.6 PPR fantasy points. And Osborn, much like Zach Pascal, could just be out of necessity just kind of there and receiving a lot of the targets from Kirk Cousins as the wide receiver 3. Like I said, the biggest beneficiary of Irv Smith not being there. And while Adam Thielen is kind of the red zone guy, Justin Jefferson is very much the field stretcher. You know, KJ Osborn is just kind of running these short to intermediate routes, and he could soak up some PPR value just from targets and receptions, and could be pretty solid as a safety net if you ever need some wide receiver production on the cheap for the remainder of 2021. And like I said, he's only rostered in 7% of the dynasty leagues that I'm looking at, so he's probably widely available in all of your dynasty leagues. But I think KJ Osborn is probably one of the best ads this week just because of his wide availability in dynasty, but also pretty solid production and overall projected volume and opportunity that he could have in this Minnesota Vikings offense. The next player I'd like to specifically highlight is Houston Texans tight end Pharaoh Brown. And yeah, I know it's really gross to talk about the Houston Texans. They somehow destroyed the Jacksonville Jaguars this week. That was actually both really fun and kind of annoying to watch with Trevor Lawrence's debut and whatnot. But Pharaoh Brown is actually rostered in fewer leagues than KJ Osborn. He's only rostered in 5% of dynasty leagues. And I think Pharaoh Brown has a pretty specific opportunity on this Houston Texans team, specifically with Tyrod Taylor at the quarterback position, because we have seen at times that Tyrod Taylor has really honed in on the tight end position. We've seen that with Charles Clay back in Buffalo. We saw it with David Njoku having 14 targets over the first 2 weeks of the year, back when Tyrod was on the Cleveland Browns before Baker Mayfield took over. We saw it last year, even in the one game that Tyrod played for Justin Herbert last year on the Chargers. Hunter Henry had 8 targets in week 1. And we're seeing it again now where Pharaoh Brown actually was second on the Houston Texans team in targets behind only Brandon Cooks, and looked like he was just kind of a safety blanket for Tyrod Taylor and just kind of a Mr. Necessary all over again at the tight end position. And so if that volume is something that we could be seeing from Pharaoh Brown for the remainder of the year with Tyrod Taylor, just out of pure necessity, like I said, you know, that is kind of like what we saw from Logan Thomas last year. That could be a pretty solid opportunity for a tight end just to have some sort of PPR value, or maybe just some sort of a safety blanket where we're not relying on him to really score a touchdown, where he could be a guy that you can plug in and he gets you 8, 9, 10 points because he has 4, 5, maybe even 6 receptions in a single week. And that is very valuable as well. And then even if he were to fall into the end zone, some other players I think that you could absolutely keep an eye on and then even add right now if you wanted to. I think Anthony Schwartz, the wide receiver for the Cleveland Browns, looked pretty solid without Odell Beckham there on the field this week. Deontay Harris, wide receiver for the New Orleans Saints, had that long ball touchdown from Jameis Winston. Also could be just out of pure necessity a playmaker on the Saints offense without Michael Thomas. Danny Amendola caught a touchdown for the Houston Texans, so there was that. Albert Okwebunam, tight end for the Denver Broncos, could be pretty interesting, especially with Jerry Jeudy missing some time because of a potential high ankle sprain. And then there's some deep stashes that I think you could also be looking at as well. Guys like Jeremy McNichols. I highlighted Mike Straken last week, wide receiver for the Indianapolis Colts in last week's video. And then Khalif Raymond, wide receiver for the Detroit Lions, actually wasn't targeted a whole lot, but he was out there a whole lot with Jared Goff. I do write a Dynasty waiver wire piece every single week for dynastyleaguefootball.com, and I did highlight a lot more names on that piece than what I have highlighted in this video specifically. So if you would like to see some more players that I highlighted in that article, you can go and become a DLF Premium subscriber on dynastyleaguefootball.com and get access to that, IDP waiver wire, a whole bunch of other in-season Dynasty content that we are pumping out from everybody on the DLF team. I will post the link to my article down in the description if you wanted to check it out, as well as the link to become a DLF Premium subscriber. If you would like to watch an entire Week 1 recap from a Dynasty perspective, you can check out the DLF podcast right up here and watch that. And with that all being said, guys, thank you all so much for watching, and we will catch y'all later.